I'm Terry Cooke, the CEO of the Community Foundation. Thanks to Ryan Ferguson and the folks at the AGH for letting us be a part of this. And unfortunately, this is one of those unscripted technical challenges. We're waiting for Armine Yalnizyan, one of Canada's leading economists, to join us from Ottawa on Zoom, and so far it's not happening, so lunch bag letdown. Let's go to trivia for 100. The significance of the protest in front of San Francisco City Hall and the parallels from another protest that ended fatally 40 years ago. And if Deidre doesn't answer this correctly, I'm going to be deeply disappointed. No? The Moscone Center. It's where, sadly, Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk were gunned down, having led a protest around LGBT rights in San Francisco. Okay, we're both older than we want to acknowledge, but would have been the 70s, right? And sadly murdered in cold blood by a former member of San Francisco City Council by the name of Dan White, who was removed from office. But damning parallels. Ryan, where are we at? We going to have a conversation, or are we... We're getting close. Okay. Bear with us. My first job, well, I don't know if jobs count, but I delivered the Hamilton Spectator and the Globe and Mail in my neighborhood. Early work. First kind of regular summer job would have been working as a helper for the brewer's warehouse for the beer truck on Barton Street, delivering the pubs and the strip joints. It taught me a lot about human nature and was an extraordinary way to come to understand a community and a neighborhood. And yours? There you go. I spent a summer at St. Peter's Hospital as a housekeeper and a porter. That was great work back in the day. And then one summer at number 2 Rod Mill at Stelco, which did more to keep me in school than any other part of my education, for sure. Here we go. Well, let me do this. We're waiting for Armine to join us on Zoom, so let me provide her bio. Armine is the Atkinson Foundation's Fellow on the Future of Workers and a leading voice on Canada's economic scene. She was the Senior Economic Policy Advisor for the Deputy Minister of Employment and Social Development Canada from 2018 to 2019 and served on Ministers Freeland and Fortier's task group on women in the economy in 2021. She helped shape the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Inequality Project from 2006 to 2017, and she's provided weekly business commentaries on CBC Radio and CBC TV from 2011 to 2018. She's also the past president of the Canadian Association for Business Economics.
Okay, we can do it this way.
Perfect.
Can you hear me okay?
Well, the vinyl is great, and you're no longer sideways. Nice.
How about am I now okay?
You're perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's the way Zoom does it to me. Okay, how are you?
Excellent. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we are grateful for your time and your wisdom. I just did your introduction. You may not have heard it, but we're glad to have you with us.
I heard the tail end of it, and I'm not sure you're going to get any wisdom, but you're going to get my time.
So the Atkinson Foundation is well known to us because we at the Hamilton Community Foundation partner with them on a whole bunch of things. not the least of which is the community benefit network that we are collectively supporting around Hamilton's LRT, hoping to generate jobs for people living in community neighborhoods and things like affordable housing and other benefits. But talk specifically about their focus on the future of decent work and the work that you are doing as a senior fellow in that regard. And then we'll talk a little bit about the film that we just watched.
Okay. I'm delighted to be with a community that is so focused on decent work, because really that is the foundation of everything we do together in society. Without decent work, without every job being a good job, there is no way we can provide the quality of life that the 10th largest economy in the world should have its citizens expect. And we are still the 10th largest economy in the world. We have been for about 5 or 6 years now. And actually, no, it's longer than that. It's been about a decade. So we've been able to actually maintain, from a GDP point of view, a pretty impressive performance. And we do have a fairly good quality of life compared to a lot of other countries. But I don't know if you know this, we also happen to be a country that has been in a foot race with the United States amongst the richest countries in the world to have the largest share of their jobs, of the job market, be low-wage jobs. In fact, the last time this international survey was taken, Canada beat the United States in the share of jobs that were low wage.
That's not a race. That's not a race you want to win.
It really isn't. And in fact, within Canada, Ontario takes the cake for its reliance on low wage jobs. And so, you know, if you want to build a really resilient economy with lots of biodiversity and the type of businesses that are there, and the type of and the standard of living we have, as well as our quality of life, you got to boost the economy from the bottom up. And that's why the focus, I think that's why the Atkinson Foundation chose me to work with them, because they have had this kind of unrelenting focus on decent work for a number of years now. On the 100th anniversary of the International Labor Organization, we decided we're going to do another 100 years of this focus on decent work. Again, it is the platform for our quality of life. You know, a lot of people think basic income is going to be the platform. It can't be, without every job being a good job, because that's where the money comes from, for our healthcare, for our education. All of the revenues that come from work is what pays for our quality of life. So we really do need to make sure, from a strictly fiscal point of view, that every job is a good job. But as you saw in the last hour and a half, people can be very happy doing almost any work if they are respected. And so many people, even during the pandemic, were called essential, but not respected. They were essentially treated as disposable. We're heading into a period now. I've been saying this for quite some time now. And again, it's my delight to work with the Atkinson and other fellow travelers. My entire life as an economist, I have spent struggling with the reality that we have had a labor surplus for the last 40 years. That's what a baby boom does. But add to the baby boom the fact that girls think they're just as good as men. And so we women poured into the labor market at a rate we had never seen in history, into the paid labor force, at a rate we had never seen in history except for the First and Second World Wars. And there were more of us in the baby boom cohort than any other generation entering the labor market. So as the baby boom has moved through the labor market, we have had a labor surplus, not just in Canada, but in the United States, throughout the global north, essentially. And we are now heading into about 25 or 30 years of labor shortages. And that will mean that we have the opportunity being handed to us to make every job a good job. And that's why it's so exciting working with groups like yours that are trying to get community benefits as, you know, the handmaiden to the remarkable investments that are being made in public infrastructure in our communities, bringing a great job to every community, bringing many great jobs to every community where those dollars are being spent.
So let me probe a couple of parts. First of all, line from the movie grabbed me. It was we've replaced the tyranny of the boss with the tyranny of the algorithm. Is that fair? And
oh yeah,
talk about that.
I think that totally is one of the remarkable features of the new moment. But I think we're really we should put ourselves on guard that the technology has power over us. We create the technology. If we don't like what it's delivering, we should rewrite it. And so this idea of techno-determinism, just like there's like this, the whole Deus Ex Machina idea of, the market has an invisible hand. Is the market's invisible hand being replaced by an algorithm? Like, it's garbage, right? We create the world we live in. And so I would caution us all from thinking about the tyranny of technology as not being changeable. Everything is changeable.
The other line that grabbed me was, yeah, Uber and Lyft give me benefits, heart disease and diabetes. Your organization in particular has been talking about really a new Bill of Rights for platform workers. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that the old regime, the old regulations, the old way of thinking about work isn't being applied and is more difficult to apply in this sector? And what is it we need to be thinking about, particularly from a regulatory standpoint, to protect workers and ensure that they get the respect and the safety and the rewards that should come from decent work?
The workers that you've been watching and listening to are not deemed employees. And our world is built, our regulatory structure, the architecture is built, when it comes to workers, it is built around an employment relationship, an employment contract, a relationship between an employer and an employee. What technology does is it unbundles tasks from jobs. And so you, Terry, are the boss of your Uber driver. Or is it the platform? Am I the boss of the person that I'm buying something from on Etsy? Or is it the platform? When somebody like the Mechanical Turk workers were answering surveys, a lot of those surveys are done by academics. Is it the academic that is that person's employer or the platform? We are entering this very difficult place to define what is the relationship. Are we replacing employment relationships with contract relationships, pure transactions, on demand, just in time transactions, in which case the employment standards regime and employment protections, it will still reach the majority of workers, but will not reach a growing share of workers who are doing a side hustle or trying to make most of their living on these platforms. So we have entered a new moment, even though the type of work is not new. Ye old gig economy is the piecework of the 1800s and the early 1900s. It is very much this idea of being an independent contractor is piecework. It's just grabbing whatever work you can find. We've been doing this for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, just picking up work as we need it and picking up workers as we need them. There is nothing new about on-demand work. It is this idea that you have no labor protections, that you could be working, as many of these people in the movie were showing, working at far less than the minimum wage, and no health and safety protections, no way of working together to improve their quality of life because they cannot organize as independent contractors. So you're seeing a whole cascade of issues that flow from this that deny people basic labor rights and protections. What is the answer to that? Well, partly it's organizing, partly it's rewriting the laws so that it is harder to misclassify these workers. That's what AB 5 was about in California. That movie did not show you that Uber successfully put Proposition 22 in front of Californian voters and removed AB 5. And in fact, is using the same strategy in provinces like Ontario to prevent governments from constraining their ability to call these people independent contractors, not their workers, by throwing a little bit of money at them in these these personal accounts. and the quid pro quo for that is you will never call yourself my employee. And we agreed to that. So this idea of who is the employer is absolutely clear. And, they keep losing these court cases that are going up to Supreme Courts in countries around the world. They are being deemed by courts as the employers. Is that true in the case of Amazon and Mechanical Turk? Is it the case in Taskwork? Is it the case in Upwork? Is it the case in Cloudflower? I mean, are we going to be fighting every one of these deals? We need to change the laws. We need to change the regulatory regime to minimize misclassification. And when you are a bona fide independent worker, to make sure you have access to some protections and rights anyway.
And piece of context, if you could, why is it the historic analogy that we're sleeping next to an elephant economically, and inevitably trends that emerge from places like California spill over the border? But why is this, as a matter of composition and importance, such an overriding concern in Ontario and Canada? Why is it that we're hitting, if you will, above our weight in terms of the gig economy and the need for the protection of platform workers?
I'm going to answer that in two different ways.
Yep.
We don't know how to measure the gig economy, but everything, the very, very poor proxies we have for measuring the gig economy show us that Canada has an outsized demand for on-demand work through these platforms. And here I'm just talking about digitally intermediated work that is done online. I'm not talking about Uber and Lyft. I'm not talking about platforms that bring people to a physical place to do a physical job.
Right.
I'm talking strictly about digital work. We punch above our weight when it comes to the demand for these workers. And we oddly punch above our weight when it comes to the supply of these workers. And the measure I'm using here is the Oxford Labor Index. And I can send you links to these things. That index has shown that since May of 2016, this world has grown by 60%. And Canada's place in this world has risen. So there's a lot of demand and a lot of supply of the workers, which is weird because, the number one place for these online workers is Bangladesh. It's followed by, let me make sure I got this right, Pakistan. Then it's the United Kingdom and the United States. Then there's, the Philippines, Indonesia, those type of countries. Then it's Canada. It's bizarre what role we already play because so many of our people are connected. Now, how much of that is side hustle? How important is that? That's a huge question going forward. That's one answer to your question is why do we have to pay attention to it? Is because we're engaged in it in a relatively large way given the size of our population. The second answer to your question is none of these platforms are restricted to an individual country. They're all online. And online is borderless. It's stateless. It's globe straddling. So what Uber does in one jurisdiction, it fights jurisdiction at a time. It fights the rules of a place at a time. But it has a strategy that it is using in jurisdiction after jurisdiction after jurisdiction. And then we're all coming at it brand new. Like we're not even thinking about organizing in a way where we're getting global intelligence to fight back, or that's just beginning, shall I say. So the idea that we should be paying attention to these struggles like AB5 or Proposition 22 is it's coming to a neighborhood near you through your computer. And those two realities, and I'll just say one very quick other thing. We're talking a lot about anti-competition law and antitrust and competition law again, because these companies are so huge. Right. And they don't control the majority of the marketplace in one country. They control the majority of the marketplace globally around the world. Yeah. And we don't have global antitrust or competition laws. But did you know that Canada was the very first country in the whole world to pass an antitrust piece of legislation? At the turn of around 1898, we passed, it was not a very good piece of legislation, but it was that piece of legislation that then led to the United States introducing its version of the antitrust. So yes, we're mostly laggards, but sometimes we're leaders. in understanding what the big signals are and what is happening in these fights around AB5, Proposition 22. Are you a worker? Are you an employee? Are you independent? Can you be covered by, can you exercise any human rights as a worker? Those questions are not going away. They are going to accelerate in the wake of the pandemic because we're going to see a spike in the demand for on-demand labor. That's what happens in the wake of every recession. People are scrambling for jobs, and people are scrambling for ways to make more money faster, save costs, and maximize their profits because they've been hungry for so long. Yep. So you're going to see, and consumers don't have a lot of money, so they want stuff on the cheap. So you've got these three forces pushing us towards a spike in the demand for on-demand labor. And if we don't do something about it, it will grow. As I say, we don't measure it very well. And it doesn't look like it's huge right now, but it will grow in the wake of the pandemic and maybe even during the pandemic. Some forms of on-demand work grew and other forms of on-demand work shrank. But we know that it is a survival mechanism for some people. It both deepens and broadens the market. You heard in the movie how some people were saying they were really attracted to it. There was more flexibility. They could make money. People that couldn't get a job elsewise can work this way. So it broadens the accessibility of a way of earning money on the one hand, but then the more people that do it, the more competition you have, the less control you have over how much money you make and when you work and how much you have to be tethered to the internet to be able to get any work at all. I mean, you heard it in the part about ratings too. If you are not married to your phone or your laptop, your ratings will plunge. If your ratings plunge, you are invisible to the people that want you to work. So it is just a brutal, brutal system. I don't know that there's a solution to that part of it, but it sure is a hustle till you die type of environment right now. And some people like it, right? Some people really enjoy being able to dip their toes in and out, but it becomes addictive and it becomes very competitive super fast.
I want to broaden the conversation a little bit because you mentioned COVID, the effect on entire countries in the world of a depressed economy. But you in particular have spent time talking, writing, and researching about what you describe as the essential economy, the caring economy, and then you coined a term, the she-cession, because of the dramatically different effect by gender on the cost of the recession and the lost gains over the last several generations that women have made simply evaporated. You talk a little bit about that, and what have we learned through the course of what initially was interpreted as the great equalizer, that COVID was going to affect everybody equally, and of course that's been proven to be untrue. So talk about the she-cession and how this is cascaded through the economy on different demographics.
Okay, for you to understand why I called it the she-cession, there's two parts to this story. Every recession, every recession till now has been a he-cession. And the New York Times coined that term in 2008 in the wake of the global financial crisis. The reason every recession is a he-cession is because normally, even when it's a financial shock or if it's a demand shock, whatever it is, whatever the shock is to the economy, say it's a natural disaster, usually the first thing that stops is goods rather than services. So men jobs get hit in manufacturing, in extracting commodities, in a series of physical things. And men dominate the world of physical production. But most of the economy now around the world in affluent economies like Canada's, about 80% of the economy is services. And when the pandemic hit, there's a second phase. So normally it's men that lose their jobs first. Those jobs tend to be better paying. Men have everybody has got what's called a reservation wage. I will not work for less than this amount of money. And when you lose a good paying job, let's say you're making $30 an hour, you're not going to jump to a job that's $15 an hour. What happens in the wake of every recession is immediately upon the beginnings of recovery is women pick up lower paid and often part-time jobs to be able to sustain family incomes and to put food on the table. And they don't go back. That has been the history since the 1950s. Once they start working, they generally don't go back once their guy has got a job. And I'm sorry, I'm sounding so, straight gendered, but that's the way the numbers unfold. This time round, the pandemic forced us to shut activity. And because most of the activity in the economy is services, and most of the service economy is still essential, but the part that you have to shut down that was deemed non-essential is mostly in the services. That's hospitality, international travel, or even local travel, not public transport, obviously, bars and restaurants, and non-essential retail. Some personal services like hair salons and nail salons and massage, like those are deemed non-essential. Guess who works the most in those sectors? Women do. And guess what? They're also low paid, and they're also really dominated by racialized people, racialized women mostly, but racialized people and new immigrants, because they're crappy paying jobs. They're not good jobs. They're by and large not decent jobs. These are the jobs that we lost. Like when you compare men and women of all ages, women's job loss was 63%, almost 2/3 of all the job loss at the beginning of the pandemic. That was true basically this time last year also. We did really well. Women have caught up in large measure, but still today, even though the head count of the number of jobs is fully back to February 2020 levels, there are still twice as many women out of the labor market completely. They just dropped out of the labor market. They're not looking for work and they're not working. Twice as many women dropped out of the labor market as men. And amongst women that are aged 55 and older, that group, it grew by 200,000 people, but there are 40,000 fewer women working now. Why is that? It's a combination of several things. There's a lot of women working in healthcare and long-term care that are burnt out, and they're dropping out of the labor force. They're just completely burnt out in that age group. There's women that were working for these crappy jobs that haven't fully reopened yet, and maybe never will. A lot of businesses, as Dan Kelly from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says, a lot of businesses are dead. They just haven't held the burial ceremonies yet. And the third reason is some women are dropping out of the labor force in order to help their own adult male and female children take care of their kids, because both schools and childcare have been so unreliable. So they are close to the end of their career. Instead of having their kids forfeit the ability to make a living now, they are stepping back. Will they come back in? Who knows? So it's a bit of a complicated story, but women have been doing more of the paid work, have lost more of the paid work, and have been doing more of the unpaid work. And if you think about things like schools and childcare as social infrastructure, if the premier stood up and said, we're reopening the economy, but we've got 25% less roads and bridges, they'd have a plan to do something about it. Well, we don't know how much childcare we've lost, but it's probably in that order. At one point, it was 60% of childcare enrollment had fallen by 60% in Peel, which isn't too far away from you.
Yep.
But we don't know how much of it has reopened again, but we know some of it has closed because so much of childcare has been run like a business. It's a market delivered service, and everything about pandemic economics is lower revenue, higher costs. Some businesses have just wiped out, but we just don't know which ones. So not only do we not know.
Sorry, can I push you on that? Because one of the things you've said is with respect to the propositions by some governments that will do vouchers or cash transfers as opposed to publicly subsidized daycare settings, you've said parents need more than money. They need support. So define or distinguish the difference. What is it that is lacking in that area, and why doesn't a transfer of a voucher or cash to certain parents help to bridge the gaps that you're talking about in childcare?
A transfer of cash will help your budget. It won't help you buy something that doesn't exist. You might be able to buy from a neighbor or somebody down the street babysitting, but you can't buy high quality childcare if those spaces don't exist. It's the same thing as, what will a tax cut buy you? Well, it'll put more money in your pocket, but it won't buy you one extra bus route, won't buy you one extra hospital bed. It will not buy you a nurse when you need it or a doctor when you need it. Like, there's some things money can't buy. It's our money together that buys the things that we individually need at various points in our life. And we need care. We need various forms of care from cradle to grave. And while if you have a lot of money, if you're really loaded, you can get all the care you need. Yep. You can get a nanny, you can get a live-in nurse, but most people aren't really loaded, and there aren't enough people to be in each individual house. That's like saying I'll have a fire hydrant at the end of every house. We don't do that. And yet we protect most houses from burning down because we have a system that is designed to serve everybody who might need it. We don't have that system when it comes to early learning and childcare. So giving people money, early learning and childcare is a market failure. Why would you give people more money to play in a market that has failed them? Yep. You've got to address the market failure. Yeah, sure. Reduce the cost.
It's a key part of economic development if you want people working.
Well, absolutely. Like, I cannot accept a job or keep a job if I don't have a safe place to put my child. And as a parent, I want not just a safe place to leave my child, but actually a place that's going to nurture that child to be the best he or she can be. And we can do that. We more or less do that in elementary and secondary school. Why wouldn't we do it for our youngest learners? Why is that up to the market?
So sadly, we're down to a couple of minutes here.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can leave us with some sense of aspiration, opportunity, optimism. Are there things that we collectively can do, thinking about the depressing nature of the future that we see emerging in the film that we just watched? What can we do to seize the opportunity to, in fact, to provide the respect, the protection, the safety, the security to people who are working, whether it's in the gig economy or the caring economy, caring for vulnerable seniors, you name it. But clearly the economy is not working for everybody. So in the 2 minutes we have left, tell us how we're going to fix that.
I'm going to use an analogy. The analogy is how governments have been kind of resistant in Canada to pivot away from oil and gas as the major moneymaker in our economy. But the market's been doing it for us. All around the world, the marketplace has been driving divestment for large investors and small alike. I know the price of oil, the price of gas has spiked recently at the oil pump, but we are going into a moment where nobody's investing in oil and gas. Everybody's seeing the writing on the wall that we are burning the planet. And so even investors, the market is doing what public policy hasn't been able to do, which is divestment. It might make oil and gas more expensive. And by making it more expensive, we might use less of it and pivot more fast to something other than carbon burning fuels.
Great piece in the report on Business in the Globe today on exactly that subject, by the way. And I don't want to cut into your 2 minutes, but a great read for those of us.
The reason I'm mentioning this is I was the president of the Canadian Association for Business Economics. I'm a labor economist. Labor is part of business. My colleagues who are primarily not labor economists, were kind enough to vote me in. I mean, I don't just put my name, you have to be voted in. And I've been very struck by how much I've learned from business economics and the marketplace. And I will tell you one thing that should make everybody in the room feel pretty darn chuffed about what the future will bring. In the months running up to the pandemic, we were seeing unemployment rates at levels we hadn't seen since 1972. I told you the baby boomers my generation created a labor surplus, not just in Canada, but everywhere, where there were more applicants for every job opening than there were job openings. We have been seeing and hearing lots about labor shortages, even in the midst of the pandemic, even though we have 1.4 million people still out of work, and a quarter of them have been looking for work actively for half a year or more. We are entering a period of labor shortage that isn't going to be a few months because of the pandemic. It is going to be probably 25, 30 years because of the pure math of demographics, because the entire global north is going through this at the same time. All of the rich countries are going through this at the same time. And so our typical go-to solution was importing the solution, right? We'll get immigrants to come in, or we'll get temporary foreign workers or whatever. Well, guess what? We're competing with everybody else who has the same idea. So the reason I'm spelling this out for you is labor is going to become more valued and valuable, right? We are going to be moving into an era where the gift of making every job a good job is going to be handed to us. Now, we could still snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. We absolutely could step in it. We could still wreck it. I mean, we did it with the pandemic, right? We can still wreck it. But the conditions are set for us to actually make the abundance that we have around us better distributed and more people's work, both paid and unpaid, more valuable, not through income redistribution, but through valuing people's contribution, both paid and unpaid, making sure they are supported in all their care needs throughout the course of their lives, so that when they do have to step away from the paid world, that they do have the supports that they need so that they can get back in and make their best contributions. We have the opportunity to maximize everybody's potential and actually bring people who have been historically sidelined and marginalized, not given very good training opportunities, not given very good job opportunities. We have the opportunity to get all hands on deck in a way that we have not had for maybe ever. And it's not like this moment's going to come again. So the work that your community is doing on community benefits agreements is God's work. It is absolutely the work of the moment, and it is of the moment. It's like you're riding the big surf, right? You're just riding it because that's the moment we are in. So I hope this gives you a sense of optimism that we can do better. All those people in that movie that are organizing for something better, people are organizing all over the world. Workers are waking up to their power all over the world. I hope that it doesn't lead to class warfare. I hope it leads to us understanding that we are interdependent and interreliant. What's the woman's name that wrote Ghost Work? Mary, somebody or the other, I forget her last name now. The co-author of the book that was talking at the end of the movie. We have a very radical moment in front of us, and it does permit us to reimagine our interdependence with one another, that we co-create not only the economy, but society, and we need one another, and we can support one another.
And on that hopeful note, I want to thank you, as always, for your passion, for your wisdom, and for taking the time to join us here in Hamilton today. God bless, and we look forward to being with you again. Take care. Armine.
Right back at you.
Please join me in thanking our guest. Wasn't that amazing? And sadly, we are out of time. Normally, we would do a Q&A, so let me apologize for the fact that because of COVID, we couldn't have a circulating microphone, so we had to anticipate